Hello and welcome everybody. Here comes another not cookie cutter build that is actually fun to play and very effective. I know it is a bad idea not doing the new DPS king build or face tank anything setup that usually never really can face tank anything in the true meaning of the word, but I do give you the full 80% damage reduction, which leaves plenty of room for errors even on Apocalypse difficulty for the more average player like me, while still being able to dodge and dealing some chunky damage. What I personally like about this setup is how smooth and fluid it plays. We have 3 weapons which are all impactful on their own and allow for a very adaptive playstyle and adjusting to every situation on the fly. I was asked a lot for a Merciless build, so I will show you the bleed setup first and then how you can adjust it easily into a full acid build. I start by giving you the basic setup for both variants and then dive into specific weapons and equipment. But the base class and armor setup are the same, you only need to change the amulet and 2 weapons around. Super easy. Starting with the Archetype combination for both setups and the synergies they have. The Archon class brings a whooping 50% mod damage buff and plus 10% critical chance for mods. This damage buff, by the way, applies to all elemental round mods like hotshot, corrosive rounds and so on, which makes building around them with this archetype really effective. In addition, we regain mod power after use, acquire mod power faster and need 15% less mod power for activation in the first place. The Challenger's damage buff is universal, means up to 35% to all damage and plus 10% crit chance, with some damage fall off the further the target is away. So we can increase our mod damage even more, while also buffing melee and range damage. The Challenger also lets us effectively use melee weapons on the higher difficulties, more on that later. The neat thing here is the flexibility to slot either class as your primary archetype. You need a revive option during a boss fight? Pick Challenger and we can easily add another revive with our last and flexible ring slot, so you can completely mess up one more time. Extremely valuable for solo players. Archon gives you a passive mod power regeneration and even more regeneration after activating a mod, so you can really use those back on back and refill mod power during downtimes. Next, our basic armor, rings, relic and damage reduction setup. As usual, all wiki links for the shown equipment can be found in the video description. Relic is the Tranquil Heart with 15% armor effectiveness, 20% crit damage and 10% crit chance as fragments. With the Challenger's strong back trait we can equip Leto Mark II, the Engineer Helmet and the Labyrinth Gauntlets and still have the heavy dodge roll, which is also much more stamina efficient. With Bark Extract, that you should always use on Apocalypse difficulty with this setup, your base armor damage reduction is 67%. We do have 10 points in Fortify to reach that number. With the Bark Skin trait and Hardened Coil as a mandatory ring, you reach 79.4% damage reduction, so almost at the cap. The full effect kicks in at 50% health, but will gradually build up when you lose health. To reach 80%, you can fill the flexible ring slot with the Ring of the Robust that also boosts your overall health. With this ring, you can even swap back to the Leto gloves for better looks and exactly 80% damage reduction. The question is if the 0.6% damage reduction and 10 health will save your life at the end of the day. I feel you can easily invest this slot in some of the other options I will show you later. The other 2 rings used in both setups are Probability Cord for 30% more crit damage and Shard Banded Ring to add 12% more mod damage on top. Why I am using these rings is explained in the specific setups. Basic traits are Vigor, Expertise, as mentioned Fortify and Regrowth. The rest you can spend however you see fit. With the basic build out of the way, let's talk about the bleed setup first. Long gun is the Merciless. Overall a nice weapon, but it does have some special kinks you have to consider. It is a mid-range weapon at best, because of the sluggish projectiles with their rather slow travel speed. And the biggest downside for me is the atrocious long reload time. It is a good second slower to reload than the Chicago Typewriter, which has a much bigger magazine and even a slightly higher DPS if you combine RPS and damage per bullet. So higher and more sustained damage with a quicker reload on the Typewriter. This is the price you pay for a bleed application after around 2.5 seconds of sustained fire and a pretty hard hitting weapon mod. The way we are setting up the Merciless here is using the typical bleed crit modifiers with the abrasive whetstone amulet and pushing crit chance and crit damage. That alone would still leave the Merciless in the mediocre department in my opinion, but with all the added mod damage and how quickly we can refill the bloodline charges, we bump up the usefulness of this gun by quite a bit. You can constantly cycle between normal shots and spamming the bloodline mod, and now we have an interesting weapon that deals decent damage without the need to swap around for bleed application on target. Because we don't have the highest base range damage with this setup, you really need to lean into the constant mod use between shots to make the most of it. We get a critical chance of 20% from weapon and relic fragment, 15% from the amulet, 30% from the weapon mutator momentum and up to 10% from the challenger's damage perk. So 75% critical chance and 140% critical damage with relic fragment, probability cord, amulet and weapon mutator. Not the ultimate best you can make of it, but still some nice damage. Add the bloodline mod spam and you have a competitive long gun. The handgun is the Tech 22 with its laser-like precision. I preferred over the MP60 here, but either that or the bolt gun would be good alternatives. Mutator is twisting wounds, so this gun can also profit from all the bleed related modifiers like the Merciless, and as weapon mod I prefer Overflow, which gives this gun a ridiculous fire rate and super quick reloads. Overcharge helps dispatching groups of enemies fast, and the damage output of this little beast is fantastic. I use it mostly for standard trash enemies and elites, or if the Merciless needs to reload and I happen to have a nice damage window during a boss fight. With Overflow it eats through its ammo reserves fast, but the gun also has higher than average reserves. I also used this super quick gun to prime my melee targets with bleed, which usually happens within a quick burst. Which brings me to the Gas Giant, my new favorite melee weapon of the game. The hammer applies corrosion with every hit, that increases the damage the target takes by 10%. We have the initial 35% damage buff from the Challenger, and I usually go with Juggernaut to add another 50% damage, and the Mutator Vampire Blade puts another 35% on top, including 3% lifesteal. Going toe to toe with elite enemies or aberrations while popping Juggernaut and Reality Rune is just hilarious fun. A quick burst from the Tech 22 for the bleed, and then it's hammer time. I'm afraid most of you will be too young to get that reference. This bleed setup provides good damage, high damage reduction and is very fluid to play. Nearly no micromanagement required and all three weapons shine on their own way. This makes for a lot of flexibility and fun because it does not lock you into one specific rotation or playstyle. Now let's turn this into a full asset build. You could say an evolution of my Harbinger of Decay build. It is really easy. Switch the amulet to the Effluvium Enhancer, brilliant name by the way. Take the Chicago Typewriter with the Corrosive Rounds mod while keeping the Momentum Mutator and use the Nebula Handgun with Twisting Wounds. Voila, you spread Pest and Pestilence and can stack up to 3 corrosive debuffs on one enemy. The bleed melee synergies are still mostly the same. Nebula's mod shreds through enemies with this setup and can be used as soon as it expires. Typewriter with corrosion rounds is also highly effective. The AR, pulse rifle or the Medic's starter LMG could also be used. In this setup I would use the Ring of Malevolence in my 4th slot, so you really never run out of mod power, but it can be overkill in some situations. I used this setup for the majority of my Apocalypse campaign on Root Earth, especially nice against pests like Venom, where you can play hide and seek with him chasing around the 2 machinery blocks, all the while he gets eaten by corrosion and the nano swarm of the nebula. Wrapping this video up are some options for your 4th ring slot. If I missed good ones, add them in the comments. There are a lot of beneficial rings available. As mentioned, Ring of the Robust for maximum damage reduction, Ring of Malevolence for insane mod power regeneration in the acid setup, Blood Tinged Ring for more passive health regeneration, and Ring of Crisis for an emergency shield. Black Cat Ring for a revive option. That one is brilliant, with the Challenger in the main slot for boss fights while playing solo, by the way. The Cat Ring triggers first and has only 2-minute cooldown. While being on cooldown, the Challenger's revive can save your incompetent backside once more, and then gives you a very good chance that the Black Cat Ring is back into action before you get down next. So it gives you 2, maybe even 3 revives during prolonged boss fights. Pure gold when playing alone. If you're not opting for more survivability, I would probably prefer a shorter reload time with the bleed setup. Gunslinger Ring, Blackout Ring or Wind Hollow Circlet can do the job. Or you go for straight up more damage with Stone of Balance. Timekeeper's Jewel is brilliant for the acid setup. Swap out Probability Ring or Ring of Malevolence for it. Whenever you have a boss fight that centers around huge weak spot hit phases, you should of course use Xenia's Malice. You can use your flexible ring slot for that, or even pack it on top while losing 12% mod damage if you swap it with the Shard Bandit Ring. In fights like the Corruptor, it is all about weak spot damage. And there are plenty of more options available, but let's wrap this thing up. Overall, a very balanced setup with high flexibility that is really fun to play. Let me know what you think about it and stay tuned for more Remnant 2 content. For now, this is all. Take good care of yourself and enjoy your gaming sessions.